Hey, Montel Williams here. Look, I've got some incredible news to share with you. I want to tell you about my brand new book that's coming out that's called The Sailing of the Intrepid. Now, this book is more than just an historical account. It's a tribute to the brave men who served aboard the USS Intrepid and a celebration of their extraordinary legacy. Writing this book was such an incredible story, and I'm really thrilled to be able to share it with you. So don't wait to grab your little piece of history. The book is available right now to order. You can go to montelmedia.com, and you can even get a limited autograph signed copy. Now, thank you so much for your support. I can't wait for you to read this incredible story of the sailing of the Intrepid. I'll see you on the pages. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Free Thinking with Montel. Today, we're diving into a topic that's deeply personal yet incredibly universal: female friendships. Who hasn't had a friend who changed their life, for better or for worse? And what happens when those treasured bonds break? Here to help us unravel this complex topic is a renowned author and gender studies expert, Susan Shapiro Barash. Susan has written over a dozen nonfiction books on women's experiences, including her latest book, Estranged. Her career spans gender studies, writing, and fiction under her pen name, Susanna Myron. I hope I got that right. She's a perfect guest to guide us on this emotional yet empowering exploration. Susan, thank you so much. Welcome to the show, Free Thinking.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Look, why don't you've been writing and teaching about women's roles and relationships for decades. What inspired you to write Estranged right now? Why this book at this moment?
Well, in truth, I started it 7 years ago, and my mother had died, and I started to see what friends were really there for me and the surprise of the closest friends who weren't. And I thought I would write it, but I was under contract for several of my my fiction books. And so I came back to this 2 years ago, but Montel, by the time I came back to it, after 2 elections that were very divisive in terms of people's sides and also, friendships, and COVID, which had really changed the way we look at our lives and our relationships. So my newest research, the last 2 years, showed me that women are actually feeling empowered when they leave a friendship. And before that, they felt they were a failure.
And this is a unique, I say, I talked about this as a universal issue because men have relationships with women, but you're really focusing on the relationship between woman to woman, and the fact that women have relied so much on those kind of relationships, not recognizing that there can be pitfalls there. So how did you research that for this book, and where did you find the women?
I found the women by going on Craigslist. And years ago, when I started my nonfiction projects, it was before the internet, and I would put ads up across the country in like women's gyms, and I would advertise in newspapers. So times have really changed. And the other part of the question?
No, it's just, it's like, the relationships between a man and a woman, friendships,
Right.
I'm just talking about regular friendships, are clearly, truly different than those between two women. And in researching this, you reached out to how many women total did you reach out to?
So I interviewed 150 women. It was between the ages of 20 and 80. It was really important to me that they were from all across the country, a very diverse group in terms of, well, I said age, but race, ethnicity, level of education. They came from cities, they came from rural areas. And interestingly, the emotional dependency and the hope that these friendships would last. And we're talking about very close friends. We're not talking about the friend you ride the train with, And they just wanted...
You're talking about what they call the ride and die friends.
Exactly.
It's use terminology of the day. But, but also, emphasize a little bit how uniquely different these relationships are than cross-gender. Like, a man and a woman who are friends for life, I'm not sure if that holds the exact same amount of emotional weight as two women who are friends for life, and the expectation that these women have for that friendship for life. Is that right? Am I thinking this right?
This is a very female-driven friend. This whole situation of breaking up with a female friend, female to female, is very specific because the culture teaches us that we are best friends forever, that romances can come and go, that we can get divorced, and there's some sort of understanding that's across the board culturally. But for friendships, we're not supposed to fail, and we're supposed to be together forever. So I didn't investigate platonic male female bonds, but I only looked at women and how they felt about their best friends.
And why is that way when it comes to female relationships? Why is it there's so much heavy emotional weight? Is this something that, I don't think is genetic, but is this something that expectations have been set over eons of time? I mean, why?
It's partly our nature and partly nurture, which means the societal messaging that we can always count on our female friends, that the men come and go, that jobs come and go, that children grow up, but that our best friends will get us through. And so we share our deepest secrets and we feel that they'll be there forever, when in fact there can be betrayal, tremendous disappointment, and we can change. We can grow apart.
Well, can you share some of the stats from your research that you've been able to uncover?
Yeah, I will. So 88% of the women with whom I spoke said that they had had a problem at some point with their female friends, and 75% felt obligated to stay. And over 60% told me that something terrible had happened. And yet 75% when they did leave felt relieved. And of course, the stat that I found really surprising is that 79% said that they found leaving this friendship, estranging, to be a positive step.
Right. That a couple of them that really threw me a little bit is 88% of women said that they have had a problem with a close friend. And like you just said, 75% of them feel like they're more obligated to stay with a female friend than with a partner or a husband. And then there's other numbers that it's some pretty astonishing numbers. 61% have had friends who has done something very terrible to them. 63% have had a friend break up with them recently. 67% of them wanted to leave a friend behind. It just seems as if we're maintaining relationships not out of necessity, but out of some sort of predetermined obligation that we feel we have. Is that right?
It's really true that for women, we are very invested in groups many times, and you're jeopardizing your status in the group if you leave one friend within that coterie. And so women talk about that. And also, women share so many experiences that if you do estrange, you'll have a kind of hole in your schedule, and that you won't be sharing those experiences anymore. And then there's a lot of history. Women spoke of, oh, our mothers were friends. We grew up in the same church. We went to college together. We have known each other since we got married at the age of 25. So this historical decision that you can't leave, even though it's really unhealthy to stay.
Wow. Well, I mean, your research identifies 7 classic unhealthy friends archetypes. Could you highlight a few of those unhealthy friend types?
So I start with the faithless friend. That's a friend where everything is going fine, except a third party or a third experience comes between you. So many women said that they let go of a very important friend when they got married or were living with a partner, because maybe the partner didn't like it, didn't like their friendship, or it was too triangulated. Women also said that when they changed their life, like one friend moved across the country, the other felt let down, and it became a wedge between them. So that's one type of friend. I look at the wayward friend. That's a friend where this is really a difficult situation, where the friend might have an addiction, maybe drugs or drinking, and you are the enabler, and it really gets to the point where you can't help anymore, and yet you care so much about the friend. I look at a friend that is very common to us, and that's called the green-eyed friend, and jealousy is really a factor. And the women said that they were almost afraid to share their good news with this friend because she was competitive and jealous.
And why do so many women have such an issue and struggle so hard to leave these types of friendships when they are clearly so painful and so toxic?
Because, well, until recently, as I said, my early research 7 years ago compared to the research 2 years ago going forward till this book came out really yields a hesitancy that reflects how we're positioned in a patriarchal culture. So we live in a patriarchy. We expect our female friends to really get us through, and we understand each other. And when this person changes or the friendship no longer works, it's very hard to lose that because it has been such a staple and it has been such a source of strength. And also, women don't want to confront other women. They don't want conflict in their lives. So we go along for a long time, or we did until most recently. And now we're saying enough.
Because you spoke to women across a wide range of age range. Were there surprising patterns that were different in each generation that you spoke to? Did that surprise you when you found it out, or were there no surprises?
There were a lot of surprises. I was surprised with younger women by the level of betrayal. I spoke with women where the friend had seduced her best friend's fiance. I spoke with women in their 40s who had breakups because they didn't look at raising their children the same way. So each age had a stage. At the same time, whether you're 20, 50, or 80, women are really looking for these friendships to last or for new friendships.
Wow. And how about you? You also uncovered what you call the four hard truths that you uncovered. Talk about those.
The four hard truths that these friendships can really fail us.
That
That
they take a mental toll, a toll on you, mental health. Women
they they really
ultimately.
can.
Go
They can
ahead. Go
take
ahead.
it on our mental health. The friendships aren't meant to last forever. And that's very hard for women to understand, that there's an expiration date.
I would think that it seems like it, but do you find that is that just an issue that women have, period, when it comes to friendships? Meaning, is it just gender specific, or you find it more difficult for them to end relationships with other women than they would with, let's say, another man or a cousin or a friend or a family member?
Well, because I wanted to contrast it to family, for each chapter, I also interviewed one sister who had broken up with her sister or was really in a very unhappy sister relationship. Because so many of the women I spoke with said to me, my best friend is like a sister to me. And so, and years ago, I had done a book on sisters. I had written a book called Sisters Devoted or Divided. And the sisters in that study who no longer spoke to their sisters sought that kind of very close bond with their female friends. So I wanted to see what happened. And the big difference with sisters versus friends is that sisters are assigned to us. This is family, but we are choosing our friends, and it is a chosen fictive family. Like, think of Sex in the City. I mean, they were like family to each other. There were no family members. It was just the four of them getting each other through. So that's how.
But no matter how unsatisfying or how troubling the relationship is, women seem to express their trepidation at leaving that unhealthy relationship, despite how unhealthy it is. Right?
Yes, although the trend really now is that women spoke. As I said, 79% of my studies said it was a positive move. But Montel, that doesn't mean that there isn't pain or grief or loss in leaving the friendship.
Well, you just mentioned the fact that each chapter you put one story of sisters in there, and again the difference between sister breakups and best friend breakups are.
The sister, first of all, there's, even with adult siblings, there's usually the mother and father, the mother lurking in the background. And so you're really causing great disturbance in the family. And with the friends, as I said, we choose these friends, we select them. So it's not an obligation to stay in the same way. There's not pressure. But we stay anyway because until recently because we've been afraid to let it go and afraid of.
I mean, I'm sorry, because you do say that. I mean, sometimes these friendships, even though they're toxic and they should have an expiration date, they don't have an expiration date. So why is it that women will just go ahead and say, "No, I'll just maintain this friendship no matter what, no matter how toxic it is to me, I'm going to stay there."
Here's what happens. Women say that for a long time, even young women, and then the friendship ends up breaking up for one of two reasons. Either it's cumulative, your friend has really disrespected you, or she's lied to you and she's out with other friends and her new friends seem more important, or some scenario where it's just cumulative until finally you say it's enough, or there's an inciting incident. You find that your best friend at work, you share your idea that you're pitching to your boss, the boss you both have, and she ends up stealing it. So that's a chapter that we didn't talk about called the thieving friend, where an idea or a person is really taken from you. And that's a real betrayal. So when something like that happens, you finally are able to feel empowered to leave.
But now, isn't it odd though that even when something like that happens years later, women will try to get back together with the person that they were estranged with? And I've often said, X is an X for a reason, and that doesn't that the reason is the same for a intimate X or a X who's a friend. If they're an ex-friend, they're an ex-friend because there's a reason. And so often we try to ignore and look beyond those reasons, not understanding that at the end of the day, that same reason is going to come back.
It's really true what you're saying. And for the women I spoke with who said that they revisited the friendship and tried to resurrect it and mend it, oftentimes the same issues arose because they were so much a part of the problem from the beginning. So the question is, do you want this friend in your life? Can you recalibrate it? Or is it time to really estrange and move ahead and have healthier friendships because you have more self-knowledge?
Is it a conscious decision or is it a unconscious, subconscious decision that drives the differences between relationships that women have with men versus relationships that women have with females?
In our culture, there is a kind of acceptance that love relationships will come and go, and that, as I said before, divorce can happen or a breakup can happen, and we know the heartbreak. We know how much we have to, have strength to get through it, but we're used to that. But with female friendships, because the belief system has always been best friends forever, what would I do without my female friends? It's much harder to let go. And also, if we're at odds with our partner, romantic partner, we've always counted on that friend to help us and to be a source of, support. So it's really confusing if that isn't working out. And a lot of times we feel shame around that.
Well, in the estranged, you talk about, the person who is estranged, who's dropped by the estranger, who kind of instigates the end of the relationship. Let's talk a little bit about how that plays out. I mean, and for those who have a close friend that's been their close friend for a long period of time, but they're thinking things are just not equal in this relationship between me and them. I reach out all the time; they never reach out to me, or the disappointment level that rises in one friend who decides I'm going to end this relationship. First off, for that person, should there be any? I mean, we should talk about the fact that they should not feel any guilt making a decision that's healthy for their own mental health, right? A, and B, it doesn't have to be a conflict, a knockout, drag out fight. It's just going to be, look, I think you don't want to just ghost someone because you've not really settled the issue. But, a very light conversation saying, I think I'm going to need to take a little space. You and I should take a little space. Well, I don't know. What's the best way to go about that? If I'm the estranger and I feel like, I need to get this person who's toxic out of my life, how do I go about that? Do I go about that? So let's say I go to a dinner, I take them out to coffee, I pick up the phone, I send them a FedEx. I mean, what's the best way to do this?
A surprisingly small amount of women in my study were able to have those conversations. that are very familiar when we break up with a love interest, with a partner or spouse. So most of them, the estranger, while she instigates it, she actually often does a slow fade or ghosting, and she distances herself. And while it seems not as honest as sitting down and having the conversation, the women who reported that they had the conversation felt very unnerved delivering it as the estranger. And the estrangee is pretty upset whether she's ghosted or there's actually a conversation about it.
But I mean, should you feel? I mean, so that gives me this idea, or gives me this thought that for some reason, if I'm not happy in a relationship, I'm the bad guy, and I'm not the bad guy. If I'm something's not right about this relationship, and it's causing me more trepidation than it is causing me relief or fun, then maybe it should come to an end. So, I mean, do women have to go to a counselor to help themselves take steps to heal after they've ended a relationship, or even before they start to end a relationship? Do they have to go to counseling first, so a counselor can help them? I'm kind of a little bit thrown by the fact that the person who's the estranger would feel bad trying to better their lives.
The women who estrange the estranger, they do struggle. There's a lot of rationalizing about why you're still in this friendship, and because you're so close, the idea that it would be hurtful to the other person. But when the stranger hits her threshold, she's able to do it, and she does feel positive about it. As far as the estrangees, because I spoke to both, and I was able to get one long story per chapter that was both sides. So both friends spoke to me about the estrangement. And for the estranger, some of them were able to see the wisdom in no longer being in that friendship, even though there was a lot to go through emotionally to get to that place.
And let's go back generationally for a second. Is this new generation of women who have grown up, with this as their master,
Right.
and in some ways, this has been a buffer in relationships because you can just don't pick it up, don't answer it, don't engage if somebody sends you something. Do you see a difference in the way one generation of women handles this versus the next generation? I mean, women in their 30, 20, or women in their, let's say, late teens are different than women in their late 20s, or different than women in their late 30s, different than women in their late 40s, or is it across the board pretty much the same?
There is wisdom that's earned, but because of longevity for women, and because women reinvent themselves almost every decade, it's almost as if you're in a new place. So a woman 20 say she's in college and she makes these best friends and she's part of a group. She's young, and yet there's a lot of tension because this starts so early. I mean, I didn't interview anyone younger than 20, but I assure you, based on earlier work, that in high school there's tension among friends and there's a question of trust. So as we get older and we have these mirroring friends, so in our 20s we're starting out, we're getting jobs, we're friendly with women the same age, 30s, getting married, having children. So every decade in the female journey is with mirroring friends where we reflect each other, and women really like that. And sometimes you just grow apart, and sometimes you can stay friends even though you're not, you're single, you don't want to be married, your best friend now has 3 children and lives in the suburbs. A lot of stories like that. But what was fascinating to me was that women in their 60s talked about the surprise of one woman about being widowed unexpectedly, and how she was sort of ditched by all the couples and the friends who were in the coupled still. And the widows group wasn't so welcoming. They said there were plenty of widows already. So we need more support, and we need to feel like there's enough pie, whatever situation.
And, and why do you think that is, that women would not necessarily turn it back? I mean, that's not the right term, but kind of estrange themselves from someone who's gone through a loss? I would think that that would be something that would drive women to come in to empathetically be compassionate to help shore their friend up. Rather, you're saying that, when there's a loss in one family, then they kind of like move away from them as if there's some sort of an illness going on there, rather than, just the fact that their friend maybe is it because they feel like they may not have anything to offer that friend who went through that loss, or they feel that the friend who went through the loss might be jealous of them. Why do you think that is?
I believe, based on my research, that for a book I wrote called Tripping the Prom Queen, The Truth About Women in Rivalry, that we exist in a culture that is a limited goods culture for women, not enough pie. So if something happens to a friend that's great, we somehow feel like we missed our opportunity. And if something happens that's very sad, we sometimes just distance ourselves, or a woman who's now single is interpreted as the competition. And that's what these women were really talking about, that as life changed, they needed to still be embraced by their closest friends, and often that wasn't really there for them.
You must be taken aback by the public display of so much hostility between women these days. I'm talking and focusing a little bit on politicians, but almost every day there's some internet, Facebook, TikTok, something going on, actually reporting and amplifying, let's say, issues between Marjorie Taylor Greene and another congresswoman or another senator or somebody like that. And you saw how women came out and lashed out against um, Governor Whitmer recently because of her, embrace of President Trump when he visited her state. Women seem to attack her as if she somehow had been some sort of a traitor just because she's trying to do her job as a governor. And as a governor, she's got responsibility for her constituents and her state that needs to have answers and issues brought before the president. And people act like, well, since I don't like them, if that's that group that doesn't, or, since I have differences with them, that group who does, you should have issues with them and you should not be able to talk to them. And I think it's kind of just crazy. But I've been taken aback in the last few days watching women pundits on news shows just go after other women where we weren't seeing this 5, 10 years ago. Is there something happening in our society right now that's causing women to lash out against women?
Well, I think it did exist before, but it wasn't so overt. It was more covert. And because we've been raised to be good girls, we weren't really supposed to have cat fights, or we weren't supposed to express something negative toward another woman socially, let alone, really in the public eye. But
That used to be, but that's changed. I mean, I from my perspective,
yeah, yeah.
since Hillary Clinton entered the political fray. I mean, women literally have become more outwardly, openly hostile to other women than I think we've seen in my lifetime growing up. I mean, I go back 10 years ago and don't run now. That's Hillary. So go back 14 years ago, and you start to see this hostility, this open hostility, just come right out that I hadn't seen earlier in my life, and I'm just wondering why that is.
Well, I agree with you that it's really obvious now. Based on my research, I believe it's because women don't support women enough. And I think it's really unfortunate. And I think it affects our personal friendships, and I think it affects the opportunities as we go out in the world. If we don't really show respect and support for other women, how will we ever get all the chances that we deserve? We have to really be more supportive.
I mean, I used Hillary Clinton as an example, but honestly, a better example might have been Harris. You know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Vice President Harris, who I don't remember ever a time in my life where I've had as many open. I'm trying to find the right word. Openly almost angrily disgusting conversations with some women about the fact, oh, Harris should never be president. She just a this, she's a that, she's this. I was like, coming from a woman, I just really, it threw me hearing a woman talk about another woman like this. I can't stand her laugh. I can't stand her this. I can't stand her this. I was like, wow, really? I mean, first off, I think we're starting to, and we have seen it very clearly that there is a definite race issue there. No ifs, ands, or buts between women, because for some reason, I think there's a certain group of women who have grown up with the idea that women of color are nothing more than maids, nannies, and cooks. And all of a sudden, you've got a woman of color who ascends to the second highest position in the world. And I don't know if that just piss off a lot of women who weren't of color, or but I never before noticed it or felt it myself, standing in a conversation and listening to other women lambast or denigrate Kamala Harris the way they did so openly. And from my perspective, it was more of a race issue than it had to do with anything else. Why do you think that is? Or do
Well,
you think that is?
I've looked at this a lot, and when I wrote Tripping the Prom Queen, I looked at how Hillary was interpreted, and I think that they both had similar problems. And that is that there has to be more support of women for women, and that they were up against so much because it's such a patriarchal culture. And it really does look, women don't, and this is why we all have to coalesce. Women don't get equal pay for equal work, still, Montel. That says everything in a capitalistic society.
But
So
when
the idea,
when you say that, and I hear that, I hear that, I hear that, I hear that, I hear that. There's so many women that say this, but then when it comes time to go in the voting booth, they think, oh, I don't want to piss off my husband, so I better vote this way. What? These are women who want equality, but then they go in and they subjugate themselves to someone else because they're afraid that if I go back home and I have to say that I didn't vote for who you wanted me to vote for, I'm going to somehow get in trouble. So I just don't. I'm wondering, why that is. I just don't understand why women don't feel as if they're gonna complain. Not, hear me. I'm not saying if you're good this, that, or the other. I'm saying, like, if you recognize the fact that there's not equal pay, there's not equal respect, why would you turn right around and then disrespect your female friends so openly?
look, I mean, in this study of mine, Estranged, there were so many women who really broke up over their politics and also over vaxing. I think that even on a personal level, what's happened with the last two elections has really affected friendships and has affected us all. But I agree with you completely that women really need to work together to facilitate the change and the equality that we need.
Absolutely. And I don't know, how do you start that? How do you inject in a generation that maybe it's time to stop the bucket crab thing, or maybe it's time to stop the hurling insults from within and try to figure out how we work together to overcome. I mean, you take a look at right now. I mean, from a society standpoint, I think women are just lucky that there happen to be bigger boogeymen, bigger boogie women out there. What I mean by that is that there are groups that the males that have been in charge are going to go after before they go after women. But you're next. I mean, women are next. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, rolling back opportunities that the society is rolling back for the estranged part of the society, people who are marginal, from LGBTQ to people of color to people. Once they have stopped focusing on that group, then they're going to go after another group. And that next group is going to be rolling back the rights that women have been able to achieve in the last 10 to 15 years, I believe.
Women have had great gains in our society, but we are not there yet. And it means to me that we all have to really work together. as friends. And then beyond that, just the goals are look, the women, based on my research and on this book, Estranged, when I asked the women in these interviews what they really wanted, we all want, as disparate as this group of women is with whom I spoke, we all want what I would call the glittering prizes. We want to be financially secure because it's a capitalistic society. We want to be educated. If we want a partner and children, husband and children, then that is a goal, and we want the best for them. And we want to have some kind of voice and power. So that's the personal. And I know you're talking about the political, but the personal is so important. And the reason some of these friendships fail in this new trend that I'm looking at is because, despite that we all want the same things, we don't look at getting it the same way. That women were so, I interviewed young women who were so divided on vaxxing and would their children be vaccinated? And then, of course, the COVID vaccinations, but really divided to the point where the friendship ended. And who did you vote for? And then that would end the friendship because their values were no longer the same.
Right. Thoughts or stats right now. Where can people go get a copy of the book?
So the book is on Amazon. It's at Powell's, and it's at bookshop.org.
Okay. And if people wanted to reach out and get a hold of you, just to have some conversations, where would they go?
I love to hear from readers. I'm at susanshapiroBarash.com.
Okay. And for those listening and tuned into this podcast who feel stuck in a toxic relationship or maybe grieving the loss of one, what are the steps that they can, take to heal and try to move forward?
So we have to really ask ourselves the hard questions. Am I getting back what I give in this friendship? Is this friend someone, if I met today, that I would seek out and incorporate in my life? Will the two of us really be able to move forward together? And if those answers are negative, what are you doing there? And we can only have healthier bonds if we leave the ones that are unhealthy.
Gotcha. If there were one thing that you want our listeners to take away from Estranged, what would it be?
That if this friendship isn't really working for you, that it is time to leave, and that the other side is fine once you cross that line, and you will feel stronger and empowered.
And Susan, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your research with us. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure that you grab a copy of Estranged. It's a must-read. Available at bookstore or Amazon near you. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in. I want to thank you, Susan, for being a part of the show today. You take care of yourself. Love that family of yours. And of course, we'll see you next time. If you want to come back, we'd love to have you. And I know our listeners are going to thank you so much for being a part of Free Thinking with Montel. So I want to thank you all for being a part of it. And make sure you tune in to the next episode of Free Thinking with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Free Thinking with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please send us your comments. Military Makeover is so grateful for the support of Purple Heart Homes, a nonprofit organization that rebuilds and transforms the homes for our veterans.
Our heroes come home with sacrifices most of us can't imagine. As a veteran myself, I've been there and founded Purple Heart Homes to help.
When I tell the story of Purple Heart Homes, it's the freedom to not have to depend on somebody else to do the simple everyday things in life.
Visit phhusa.org/makeover to learn how you can help.